Do it.
Do it.
Welcome to the Austin Otaku Podcast, hosted by Jesse McDonald and Keith Good.
Welcome back to the Austin Otaku Podcast, everyone. My name is Jesse McDonald, and joined once again by the ever-late Keith Good. Keith, how are you doing?
Wow, that's actually quite accurate. I was going to say that's not wrong, is it? Because there have been a couple of meetings that actually a number of meetings per week. I'm trailing in about 2 minutes late to. It's not that I'm actually running late. It's just I don't want to be there.
Fair. Very fair.
Yeah. How about yourself? How's it going?
Pretty good. Gearing up for next weekend for Halloween, the absolute favorite time of the year. So yeah, things are fun and spooky around the house right now.
Should we call you Jack?
You can if you'd like. I was known in high school for my Jack Skellington beanie, so it wouldn't be out of character.
It's a great time of year.
Oh, totally.
I think.
Well, very excited for our guest this week, someone that we've both known for a little while and an incredibly interesting person. We're going a little out of our normal path today. Ordinarily, we talk to people who are successful in their full-time jobs and happen to have some pretty amazing hobbies and side passions. Today, however, we're talking to someone whose full-time job actually covers many of the areas we talk about on the show. Our guest today is the friend of both Keith and myself, James Hibberd. He is an editor-at-large at Entertainment Weekly, entertainment podcaster, and author of the recently released Fire Cannot Kill a Dragon, Game of Thrones, and the official untold story of the epic series. Some of his beats for Entertainment Weekly have included, of course, Game of Thrones, Star Trek Discovery, Westworld, DC's Justice League, and a favorite of both myself and Keith, The Mandalorian. In his spare time, he enjoys hiking, working out, and hatchet throwing. You can catch him on his own podcast with co-host Darren Franick called EW's Game of Thrones Weekly. It's on pretty much every podcast platform. So with that, welcome to the show, James Hibberd.
I'm so glad I got to hear your intro because I now finally know how to pronounce the name of your podcast.
We did it.
We did it. We've got one more convert.
Yeah.
We're now at 15 people.
Well, we're at 25 now. We get about an average of 25 every week listening to this, and unless we get somebody super special on like Mark Holcomb or Casey Marquis, then we'll get up on into the further double digits, not quite triple digits. And then, of course, there is our joke episode with Gary, which is still our highest rated podcast episode to date. And it was only 5 minutes long. That's probably why people like it the most.
Probably. They had no choice.
Well,
how are you doing, James?
I'm doing pretty well. We've been just kind of, the book came out like 2 weeks ago now. It just seems like it's been out for years at this point, and been doing rounds of interviews and that sort of thing, and excited to talk to you guys.
Well, hey, that's how movies work now. They come out, and then a week later, they're released to streaming and or DVD. So, it is almost an eternity in the entertainment industry, I would say.
Yeah. Well, especially now during the pandemic, it's just like it's accelerated the trend of everything going to streaming, as quick as possible. When you have titles that were originally supposed to be released in the theater now being released on streaming instead, and so forth. Unless you're Christopher Nolan, then you can sort of force Tenet to still open in theaters.
Well, just keep in mind, we experience about a year's worth of news every single day. So, I think we're making our collective ADHD a lot worse in the pandemic.
I totally agree. It's I feel like I'm constantly bombarded with everything from every direction now.
Yeah, but this is fine.
This is fine.
Yeah. So Jesse and I know you James, why don't you take a minute to let our listeners know who you are and tell us a little bit about yourself professionally and personally.
Oh man, the last thing I always want to do is tell anybody who I am.
That's not how you sell books, man.
Yeah. Well, I'm editor at large at Entertainment Weekly, where I've worked there for about 10 years now, and we live here in Austin. And one of my beats at EW has been covering Game of Thrones. I basically started a few months before the first season began, and I've covered many shows, many films, but that's been a pretty big area of focus. Probably written hundreds of stories about it at this point, and now this book. So there's obviously a prequel series coming out, so probably more to write in the future, but now starting to expand out and cover more different things.
Yeah, heard about that. That should be very interesting. They're going further back in time to the Age of Dragons and doing a Game of Thrones related to that. That's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, House of the Dragon takes place like 300 years before the events in Game of Thrones. So everything's going to kind of look a bit different, but not too different, and tell a story that's familiar to people who have read George R.R. Martin's Fire and Blood, but I get the feeling that they're going to be doing a lot of their own unique twist within that story. So it sounds pretty cool. If of course you have to get it shot, and which is its own challenge nowadays. But they're looking to have it out by 2022. Wow,
that is fast. I mean, if it's anywhere as epic as the Game of Thrones series was, that's really fast. Now, yeah. A lot of listeners may not know this, but when you did a lot of your reporting on the Game of Thrones, it wasn't just you sitting in your living room and watching an episode and, producing a write-up after the show has aired. You actually went on location and talked to a lot of the actors and folks that were involved behind the scenes. So you went to Spain, you've gone to Northern Ireland, you've been to a number of places. What was your favorite on-location interview spot?
Well, first of all, the more that you can call it the Game of Thrones, the better, because it's adorable and everybody will snicker that show. So I just think you should just, throughout the rest of this, just keep calling it the Game of Thrones. My favorite location was I think that had to be Spain. Just because it's food's amazing, the weather's great. So just as a spot to have to be outside all day, all night, you want to be in a place like Spain, but you don't really feel like you're on the show nearly as much as you do when you're in Northern Ireland, when it's green and rainy and cold and kind of miserable. I mean, then you really feel like you're in Westeros. When you're in Spain, it's a little more hard to have that immersion feeling.
That's great. So you've also had a lot of dinner interviews as well, and I'm really curious about your dinner interviews, because that's where people really kind of let down their guard, I feel, when they're eating, because you've literally got to open your mouth, insert food, and chew it in front of the person interviewing you. So what is that like when you sit down across from George R.R. Martin, or you sit across from Kira, Emilia Clarke, and have dinner? Well,
first of all, drinking definitely opens up people more than eating. I would say so. It really depends on whether they have some of that or not. But it's a little surreal and weird at first. It almost feels like a job interview or being on a first date. When you have that sort of awkwardness and formality, and then you both kind of relax and start enjoying the conversation. The one thing that makes it very different from those things is, of course, fans will come up, pretty regularly and interrupt and want photos and that sort of thing. And it's interesting when you're around, celebrities that have to that are really in the public eye, how much they get approached. And for them, it's like, oh great, I have to deal with this, but they're also very much aware that this is probably going to be the biggest moment in that fan's day, or maybe even their week or month. So they also want to be polite and help them out. But you start getting almost like a sixth sense of like people watching and about to like make their move and move in on you after a while.
The stalker sitting on the edge of your visions, waiting for an opportunity to hop. I was with Kit Harington in like a parking lot in Northern Ireland one time, and it was the weirdest thing because you looked around and there was like nobody around, and then like 2 seconds later, there's just like a person like right there. It's like people just kind of appear out of nowhere. Wow.
It's really funny.
And you saw that evolution too, because a lot of these actors for the Game of Thrones were relative nobodies when they got cast originally, right? I mean, especially the kids. I mean, but certainly even like Emilia Clarke, who was I think 22 when filming started for this. Had not yet had a big break, and I don't think Kit had either, for the most part. So you watch them sort of go from relative unknowns to being quite popular. Yeah.
When they cast it, they didn't have. I mean, they had a pretty big budget for a television show, but they didn't have a big budget for trying to pull off Game of Thrones. And when you have to build this whole world, it's enormously expensive. I mean, all the sets and the costumes and the weapons and you have this huge cast. I mean, the cast is very large, no matter who you have at. So for, obviously they got Sean Bean to play Ned Stark in the first season, but for the most part, they went with unknown actors because unknown actors are not expensive, but that also means you have to cast it the hard way, which is one of the many ways in which Game of Thrones is probably the most difficult to produce TV show of all time. Is they had from the very beginning they had to kind of go through tape after tape and audition after audition and look for that needle in a haystack, to try and find the right person. And it's pretty miraculous that they got so many parts right, and they found so many great talents in there, and that those talents lasted through the whole show. I mean, when you're signing like a 12, 13-year-old, you hope they're going to be around for 10 years to continue being in the show and get better as an actor every year and keep renewing their contract and that sort of thing. But you don't know. I mean, it's a lot of things can happen in somebody's life, and especially when you're dealing with the kid who hasn't had any acting experience before. So the show was this massive gamble because it really did sit on the shoulders of all that young cast.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was kind of curious, especially, having been in a position where you've written this official behind the scenes of the entire show, which has become so famous, which it's kind of strange for me because in my mind, you're just James. So for you to have put out something like this, it's kind of mind blowing to me. But I was wondering how difficult was it to put something like this together? Like, are you kind of digging into kind of previous notes and interviews you've done, or have you just built these relationships where it was easy to go back and have these conversations again?
I mean, it was definitely the toughest work year of my life. And I was reminded of something that David Benioff said, the showrunner, on the set of season 2. He was talking about how making Game of Thrones is so hard that it redefines what you think of as work. And this year, that was true for me. It kind of redefined what I thought of as work because I have a 1-year deadline, but I also have full-time job at EW. And so it was extremely difficult because I wanted to do as many new interviews as I possibly could. I wanted as much of the book to be new as possible. And so when people were reading it, they were constantly finding new things that they have never heard, even if they've read everything out there before. And at the same time, I'd been covering the show for 10 years. So I did have this archive of previously published material that I had to sort and organize, first. And going through back through that was a trip, because I had done so many interviews that there was a bunch of stuff in there that I had forgotten about, and I did the interview and I wrote the story, and I was like, oh, I forgot that this actor said that, or it's been funny since the book came out. I have like Game of Thrones Google alerts on my phone, and I'll see this headline, and it'll be a headline at some publication from a quote in the book that I actually published 7 years ago, but nobody knows everything that's out there, and I guess an editor somewhere thought that it was new to them and new to the readers, so why not? So,
and it wasn't as easy as you just saying, "I'm going to write a book about Game of Thrones." The Game of Thrones, yeah. And you had to jump through a few hoops before you got to the point where you could even start putting pen to paper in many cases, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, there was I had to make a deal with a publisher. I also wanted to make a deal with HBO so I could get photos and use of their trademark, and wanted the Iron Throne on the cover. But at the same time, we didn't want any editorial interference, which is kind of a high bar to hit, is to approach HBO and say, hey, look, I want to write a book about your most popular show of all time, and I want photos for it, but I don't want you to tell me what to put in the manuscript. So there's definitely some back and forth over that. And that was, to me, one of the musts. I absolutely did not want to be in any circumstance where a bunch of executives were sitting around a table with red pens going through my manuscript. And so, we got editorial independence, which was extremely important. And then there's a bunch of must-get interviews, because to me, unless I got a new interview with George and a new interview with the showrunners and a new interview with the lead actors, I just wasn't going to do the book. So there were kind of months of uncertainty trying to get these interviews with people that were really exhausted from talking about the show and from doing the show, and were really ready to move on and get something new in their lives. So it was tricky to get some people on board, and thankfully, so for a long time, it was like I was working on the book and just unsure whether this was actually going to happen.
And yet here it is, 450 pages later, and tons of really nice pictures toward the middle, and actually sort of like a third of the way through, and then another 2/3 of the way through, you got another big set of pictures in there.
Yeah, they did a beautiful job in the book. I mean, the cover looks amazing, the packaging looks amazing, and you say 450 pages. The book was assigned at 100,000 words, which I thought at the time, oh my God, how am I going to do 100,000 words? Your typical EW cover stories, like around 2,000 words. And then I ended up writing 150,000 words, and that's what's the 450 pages. So it ended up being 50% longer than I expected. And there's just something about the world of Game of Thrones that lends itself to constant expansion. It's like there's always more to kind of explore and look into, and it always seems like both simultaneously too much and not enough. And that's actually something that like George R.R. Martin and the showrunners also struggled with, is that you have this story with all these different characters, and then it's like, well, when is enough? How do you tie it back all together? What are the endpoints? And so it's like going down this road, and there's these alleys that constantly shoot off from the sides, and you have to decide, well, how far to go down that alley before you get back on the road, going towards your destination. And so there is sort of a constant battle in my head in terms of how much to do and how much to cover. And ultimately, I want the book to be really readable and entertaining, and that was a key goal. And so whenever I was faced with a decision, I was just like, am I including this just to be comprehensive, or am I including this because it's actually interesting? And so I always try to weigh on the side of if something is actually interesting or not.
Very cool. And this is actually not your first. This is not your first go as a writer, obviously, because you write every day of your life for Entertainment Weekly. Yes. But you've actually delved into some of the screenwriting work yourself in the past.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. I had a couple years when I first moved to LA, like well over a decade ago, as struggling screenwriter, and I definitely really struggled, and it is a brutally difficult thing to do. And I found that there's a whole, I think a lot of times people think of screenwriters and think, well, if you get paid to write a script, you get this big check and you're rich. And it's like, no, there's a whole economy of being paid to write scripts where you're not really making enough money to live on. You're just kind of, a director will give you, 10,000 for this, but then it takes a whole year to do, sort of thing. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And I guess the one good thing that did come out of it, was that when I got my job at EW and before that, the Hollywood Reporter, I felt like I had a better understanding of how stories are put together and how movies work and how the business side works as well. And it also infused me with a bit of empathy for showrunners and creators, because you get a sense of the hassles that they go through and the rejections and all of that. So I think it made me a better reporter, if not a better screenwriter.
Awesome. And people can actually see your movie
please no, because it's really not my movie. It's really not, so.
Well, yeah, one of your movies actually was never really produced. It was the history of Waco, essentially, or it was the Branch Davidian research that you did for Waco.
Right. Yeah. That was one that I was really excited about, because I knew that there was a movie there. And since then, I forget who did, but I think at least there's been like one or two projects like that over the last 3 years. But it was very, very clear that this was a movie or a limited series or something, that the whole standoff there. And there were some clashes with me and the director in terms of the angle to take on it, and how sympathetic it should be towards David Koresh. I was not particularly sympathetic towards the cult leader who led his hundreds of people to their fiery demise. It's inherently dramatic subject, and I'm sure that the other projects that came out recently on that did it well and did it right, but I don't really have an urge to watch them, having spent a year on a script about it.
And now you live an hour and a half south of Waco right now, so there you go.
Well, indeed. It looks like we are at our halfway point, which means that we are at our Tell Me Something Good segment.
Tell me something good.
Ooh, good.
So this is the point in the show where we give our Austin Otaku recommendation for the listeners of something that is generally nerdy that they definitely need to check out. So with that, guest honors, what would you recommend?
Okay, this is not particularly nerdy, actually. But it is something that I'm watching now, and it's sort of the opposite of really nerdy. I mean, anyone who's a sports fan has already seen this. But here's the thing, and this is why I chose it. I am not a sports fan. I do not know sports. I don't know the sports balls. I don't know innings. I don't know periods. I don't know quarters. I don't know touchdowns. I don't know that whole world at all. But a friend convinced me to watch The Last Dance on Netflix, the story of Michael Jordan's final season with the Chicago Bulls, and it is riveting stuff. It is a limited series for people who don't like sports, who are the type of people that would, listen to your podcast and think sports aren't for them. It completely draws you in. And it actually has this weird advantage for non-sports fans. And that is that if you're like me, you have no idea what's going to happen in this story. Like I think of Michael Jordan as the guy from Space Jam, right? So the story is filled with tons of twists and turns, and if you're a non-sports fan, it kind of plays on an entirely other suspenseful, compelling level.
Was that the season where he got that really bad flu?
I don't know. No spoilers. I'm halfway through it.
Okay. So I also am not a huge sports ball fan. I played a little when I was a kid, and I just remember there being a season where he looked like shit and had like really puffy eyes and was still playing. I remember my dad being like, yeah, see, that's what you would have to do if you went and played professional basketball. So I went to art school.
Well, that, and I don't know, grow another foot in height, I would suppose. At least. That. What about your recommendations for the week, Jesse?
So I'm sticking with a Halloween theme. I'm gonna beat this to death for the rest of this month. So I recently started reading, and I'm halfway through the novelization and sequel of Hocus Pocus. So I read through what essentially was the first movie and are now onto the sequel, and it is awesome. It takes a few liberties where it adds some minor details to set up the next story that weren't in the movie from '93. It also adds in a few little details that kind of put you into the character's mind a little bit more. And it's super interesting. It's one of my favorite movies, so it's cool to read it. Granted, it is very much a young adult kind of easy read, but with a kid, that's the easiest thing for me to do. So I picked that up and have really enjoyed it. So
yeah,
that would be my recommendation.
They are coming out with a sequel, right? Did I read that recently?
They are indeed. I believe there was a picture of the ladies on set as the Sanderson sisters again. I could be wrong, but it looked great. If it was fake, it looked convincing.
Fantastic. That was a fun movie. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, I like it a lot. What about you, Keith?
So I swear I'm going to leave the archipelago of Japan at some point, and not
what Japanese book you got this week.
It's actually not a book. I'm actually going to go and sort of play off of the joke last week where I said that both Shelley Fagan and I are into hair care and skincare products, and actually give you a skincare product. I am a huge fan and have been a huge fan for more than a decade now of this product that you can get called Salux. It is and that's SALUX. It is a Japanese beauty skin bath wash cloth / towel. And this thing is amazing. It exfoliates the skin. Nice and foamy. It's fantastic. I highly recommend it. The older I get, the more I realize I got to exfoliate. And as you get into your 30s, Jesse, you'll realize you'll need to exfoliate. So I highly recommend the Salux washcloths. I know this is like really, really lame, and they are not a sponsor, but I have been a fan of this for a while, and I can't believe I haven't recommended it yet. So there you go. Those are our recommendations for the week. Thanks, guys.
Tell me something good.
So, as we're kind of talking about the beats that you've worked in the past, of course, one of mine and Keith's particular interests, while we both, I believe, enjoy Game of Thrones, it's definitely not our mainstay, but the fact that you worked on The Mandalorian is incredibly intriguing. Can you tell us a little bit about what that experience was like?
Yeah, especially with season 2 right around the corner here, which has been kept as this total black box by Disney. Mandalorian's tough to cover because there's a lot of secrecy, like more secrecy on that show than even Game of Thrones. To give you an idea of how secret, for the first season, Disney showed us 20 minutes of advanced footage, and we're all excited, and we went down to their studio, and this is like, I think, a month before air, maybe a month and a half. And so we watched 20 minutes of footage, and it was really good. And then we watched the premiere where they unveil Baby Yoda at the end of it. And then there's a scene in the next episode, the child, this fight scene, and we realized they edited they digitally edited Baby Yoda out of the scene we saw so we wouldn't see Baby Yoda during our preview footage. So because in this fight scene, it keeps cutting to Baby Yoda. And we're like, wait a second. So Baby Yoda's actually in this scene, and we just saw this whole alternate universe version of the scene that was cut together just for us. But to keep that hidden. So that's kind of the level that they go to protect secrets with that show.
I can see that though, because leading up to any of the episodes being released from Star Wars, there were always these. You could probably see hundreds, if not more, videos from Star Wars Theory and Mike Zero and a bunch of other vloggers that sort of theorize what the next episode might be about, or they might have caught a whisper of something and then they want to sort of amplify that. And invariably it always turns out to be bullshit. Anything that they say in these sort of theory videos, it never proves to be true. So I'm really I'm not surprised that they're much more secretive about The Mandalorian, because it has been hugely popular with good reason, because it, in addition to being a Star Wars story, quite frankly, it is a show that could stand on its own, even if it weren't in the Star Wars universe.
I agree.
It's very much I wouldn't call it a spaghetti Western per se, but I'd certainly say it definitely has a lot of the elements of a classic Western movie that could have translated to any universe.
Yeah, that's what the director and producer Dave Filoni, who of course worked on Clone Wars and Rebels, before this, was talking about in an interview that we did for season 2. He was just talking about, because I asked him, I was like, why did this work when I didn't put it this way, but when the recent movies didn't, and he was like, we kept it simple. We went back to the basics of, basically the first act of the first movie, where you have these characters and situations that you can understand. There isn't some huge complex net of story that you're having to kind of keep weaving together and keep paying off and keep referencing. It's here you have a gunslinger and he's in the space version of the Old West. Here you have this child, and you don't need to know anything about Baby Yoda you don't need to know anything about Yoda to understand that the child is cute and adorable and vulnerable, and he's trying to protect it. I mean, you don't need to know anything about the Jedi or anything else. So it just kind of plays very simply, and they very much made it so that anybody could start watching that without having watched anything else previously.
Indeed. And they had a lot of fun with the show, too. I mean, they brought in basically Star Wars troll Bill Burr as a character in one of the episodes. And you could tell by the writing in that they were really trying to sort of poke at the serious fans. They brought up Gungans. Bill Burr sort of says, the Mandalorian must look like a Gungan underneath. Yeah. And then they bring up that casino planet from the second of the sequels that really irritated everyone. Stormtroopers can't hit a target, but he was a sharpshooter. I really love how they used Bill Burr for that, because Bill Burr doesn't care at all about the Star Wars universe. He had no interest in it before this, and here they bring this guy in to sort of poke fun at the franchise itself. Yeah, there's definitely some of his lines where you're just going, Bill Burr must have come up with that. I mean, like when he points at the New Republic guard, and he makes fun of his shoes matching his belt. He's got the white shoes and the white belt. It's like, look, his shoes match his belt. I mean, that's classic. Nobody's sitting down and like typing that line into the script. That has to be Bill Burr. 100%. So I assume that they haven't really let you in on any of the special guests that might be appearing up in the second season of The Mandalorian yet. Well, no, they've been very secretive on that, but
they're not denying a whole lot either. I mean, there's definitely people coming to the show. I mean, I think there's going to be some big shakeup at some point, on that show. It seems like they're primed for some potential, Game of Thrones like drama, which is actually a show that showrunner Jon Favreau has said that he's taken some inspiration from for this season. And beyond in terms of the world building, and certainly in terms of many of the things involved, just as a marketing thing, if you watch the trailer closely for The Mandalorian, I'm pretty sure that trailer is only pulling stuff from maybe the first 2 episodes. I'm which is something that Thrones would largely do too. It'd be 90% of the trailer was from episode 1 once they got into the later seasons, as to not spoil anything. I feel like that trailer is tip of the iceberg trailer.
That's a good way to do it. And certainly emulating what Game of Thrones did from a development standpoint makes a lot of sense, because that show carved its own path in so many ways that other shows wouldn't have dared done. And, for example, I can't really mention that's a bit of a spoiler, but certainly killing off a lot of the characters that became favorites was one of the ways that they went against what shows had traditionally done in the past. So I'm curious to see what they do with this. You and I talked quite a bit about The Mandalorian, in fact, during the first season, because as you found out very quickly, I'm a big fan of the Mandalorian people and the history of the Mandalorian. So I would occasionally frantically text you for some deep cut fact checking on
about season 2 episode 12 of Clone Wars or whatnot. So yeah, you're very helpful in that regard.
Yeah, and it was tough for me to decide what to tell you, because there is the Mandalorian history that we know of from the stuff that's in canon right now. It's the stuff from the Clone Wars and Rebels, and then there's the stuff that is from the expanded universe and Legends that haven't yet been integrated into the canon. But I think they add to the story there, and I'm really curious to see how they use that within the Mandalorian going forward.
Yeah, I haven't read a huge amount of the expanded universe stuff. I did read the Tharn trilogy though, and do wonder if they're going to bring him in at some point. I feel like they will. I feel like that seems like a character, a potential. Here's the big bad of season 3 or season 4 that they bring in. If Mando heroically defeats Moff Gideon at some point.
Well, that would be very interesting, because Thrawn disappeared at the very end of Rebels, and they went off into some distant part of the galaxy, toward the end of that. So that would be a very interesting turn there, for sure. So you cover a lot of nerd beats, to say the least. You and I have checked out Aquaman, Shazam. What else did we see? Did we see Justice League? There's a couple of things that you and I have watched together, and you've actually reported on. Have you found yourself outside of Game of Thrones with a beat that you were like, oh, I really hope this works out, and I hope this goes for a long time?
I mean, I did get onto Westworld pretty early. That was another show where I, from the outset, thought this could be big, and I want to get on this, and it has been big. It hasn't been Game of Thrones big, but it's definitely been a big show, and another one that's near and dear to my heart, but I get to cover it so infrequently is Black Mirror, because I absolutely adore that show. I think that's just one of the best shows out there, and they have many episodes which are absolutely perfect little pieces of sci-fi drama. So, but that's also very much on hiatus right now, and there's no return in sight at the moment, unfortunately.
So I was curious, is there anything that you've started out covering that you were just kind of like, okay, whatever, I kind of get it, but then you became a big fan of?
I usually don't get more of a fan of something as things go on, because you start to understand all the nuts and bolts, and everything eventually sort of becomes work in the end. It's much more common for you to start out liking something and then end up disliking something, and that would be like the case of like Dexter, which is a show that notoriously went into the toilet in its final couple seasons, but that's when I'm doing the weekly recaps on, and you write recaps for fans, so you're supposed to be writing, they're not reviews, but at the same time it gets harder and harder when you're sort of struggling to find anything to appreciate about the show, and then you eventually just start getting sarcastic as you can, to try and be at peace with yourself, because it gets so rough in terms of just watching it.
How about missed opportunity shows? Has another editor at large been assigned a beat that you were like, oh, I really wish I had gotten that?
I was jealous of Walking Dead for a little while. Dalton Ross does an amazing job covering Walking Dead, but that's one where sort of with Dexter, I've turned on it as a fan, and I think it would be difficult to, sort of increasingly difficult to sort of cover that, while at the same time holding AMC in a lot of contempt for the way that they've handled that show. I mean, they've basically just run it into the ground, and they do not care really narratively about it. From what I can tell, they really just want to kind of squeeze every last bit they can get out of it, including they recently announced a spinoff with Daryl and Carol, two of the most popular characters in the show, and they announced it before the final season aired. So it's like, okay, well, now if you're a fan, those two characters survive. You've been watching them on this show for all these years, and AMC just kind of spoiled part of the ending for you. Right. Just to get out there that, hey, we have another Walking Dead show coming. It's like it's sort of like the opposite of the way like HBO or Disney or Netflix would handle a creative endeavor like that. But at the same time, AMC has Better Call Saul, which is one of the best shows on the air right now.
Gotcha. So we, our show generally is about successful folks that have hobbies that help sort of inspire their drive in their full-time jobs. And then, of course, you come in and you quote Benioff, who basically says you have to become obsessed with this work, and this has to be an all-consuming type of thing. So what is your experience in dealing with folks in Hollywood and in the entertainment industry in general when it comes to success for folks who either are 100% obsessed, like Benioff was mentioning, or folks that have a good, nice balance of work and personal interest? Have you seen anything consistent about that?
I haven't. Other than that Benioff point, I don't think that you need to be like that for everything. I don't think that, but I do think that there are some things that in order to go to a certain level that you have to be, be just absolutely obsessed. And it's funny because you asked me, I know you do this outside hobbies question and how I don't really have any, in terms of how, hobbies that affected my work. I went through like a big self-improvement kick in my 20s, like reading every personal improvement book I could find, listening to Tony Robbins tapes, reading everything by Eckhart Tolle. He's like the Power of Now guru. Basically, if there was a how to improve something and with a 7 in the title, I would run out and grab that book. And I think it just came from not wanting to be a failure and wanting to be better. But that was kind of a hobby that wasn't geared towards specifically journalism, but it was just kind of geared toward me. But that did end up, impacting how I did my job and my career, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've read a couple of Eckhart Tolle's stuff. It's very interesting history that guy has, going from sleeping on a bench in a park to being one of the most read writers, I think, in modern history.
Yeah. And with all that stuff, it's like I practice it, but at least I know the theories. So occasionally when I'm in a bit of a crunch, I can sort of access one of those ideas and pull myself out of it.
One thing that we were kind of talking about a little bit, were obviously your dinners that you frequently have with the celebrities that you cover. But you also have mentioned that one of your actual hobbies away from work is hatchet throwing, which is something I really enjoy. I think, Keith, you were there. We did it a couple years ago at a conference, and it was super fun. Something I've always wanted to get into, but it's hard to get into a place around here. They're always booked up with douchey bachelor parties.
That is the depot.
That being said, if you could take one celebrity on one of your beats, or even a beat that you don't have, to a hatchet throwing place, who would it be? Who do you think would be the best at it? Who do you think would be the worst at it?
Who would be the best at it? Well, I mean,
I
best
know the
at
obvious who would be the best at it.
I mean, Kit Harington would be the best at it. He's a swordsman at this point. I mean, he knows his way around a blade. Who would be worst at it? I don't know, but in terms of a celebrity that I would like to hang out with, I mean, George Lucas is one person that I have not been able to interview despite covering The Mandalorian, and I feel like he'd be terrible at hatchet throwing, but I would enjoy the conversation.
I agree. I think he would be pretty bad at hatchet.
Too funny.
Yeah.
I think we've actually got a competition that needs to happen then, because I think Jesse and I both are under the impression that Jason Momoa would dominate.
That's right. Yeah, because he had that video too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
you're right. Yeah. Momoa.
I think we should have an
help us
Austin.
out.
Yeah, I think we need an Austin Otaku sponsored Kit Harington, Jason Momoa hatchet throwing competition.
Ah, hell, George Lucas too. Bring his ass.
Bring him in as well. Why not?
Make it happen, James. Get us Momoa, Harrington, and Lucas. We're going to do a hatchet throwing.
That would be quite the trio.
Yeah, let's do this.
We'll see if Maisie can do it too, because she might have a little bit of.
She's had tons of stored play experience.
Yeah, she could definitely dominate as well. Yeah. So let's just do a whole GOT hatchet throwing competition plus George Lucas. Maybe, maybe throw in some Bill Burr. Bill Burr, get Bill Burr in there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll take them all. Whatever.
I was doing league play for a while and then fell off it because partly of the bachelor party, popularity surge that you talked about. Because suddenly when you see it on everybody's Instagram and everything, it does take some of the fun out of, I found some cool little niche thing that, as a person who has previously discussed is terrible at sports, I found myself weirdly good at that. It's like, I finally found something that you can almost call athletic that I sort of naturally don't suck at. And but then the bachelor party invasion happened.
It's really funny. When we went in Vegas a couple years ago, they had shovel heads that we threw.
Mm-hmm.
And me and one of our other friends, Brian McDowell, found that we were really damn good at throwing shovel heads. So we joked, because we're both citizens of a micronation called Ladonia. And we joked about trying to make the throwing shovel heads, the national weapon of Ladonia. Currently in the works. We shall see.
Yeah, that was a good place. They had spears, they had hatchet heads, they had the you could throw a spade, you could throw steel cards as well, throwing stars. They had pretty much everything there that you could throw, and that was a lot of fun, as I remember.
Oh, yeah, there was a lot of drinking and a lot of nerdy digital marketers, so I remember half the night. I do remember throwing the shovel heads.
It was funny. The drunker I was, the better my hatchet throwing was. I don't know if that's related to some sort of Viking blood somewhere deep inside of my genome, but, I'm happy to accept that.
Yeah, yeah. The one here in Austin is pretty strict in terms of the number of things you can throw. It's mainly hatchets and axes, but I do know that there are other ones like that one in Vegas where it's like they'll just give you all sorts of weapons of destruction to kind of throw. Here's some throwing stars. Here's some kitchen knives. Just throw whatever you want.
Here's a baby. Throw the baby.
Exactly. So dining is another one of your favorites. You're
I was struggling to fill out the hobbies line of your like intake form. Okay, so I'm like, well, I like eating. Who doesn't like eating?
Well, that's true. That is true. But you and I have had an opportunity to eat at some pretty nice restaurants here in Austin, and I know that this pandemic has really ruined a lot of the ability to go out and eat a lot. What is the place you wish you could go right now that you are either avoiding due to just worries about COVID, or may have closed due to COVID, or may have limited availability?
I think it'd have to be Red Ash, right? I mean, it's a downtown sort of modern Italian place with they have this just garlic soaked country bread, garlic bread that's only like $2 a person, and that's all you can eat, and it's just like this salty, garlicky, buttery carb explosion in your mouth. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and they've got my favorite cocktail there, Satan Circus.
Yes, yes.
It is a wonderful drink, and it's usually if it's prepared by the bartender with the purple hair, it is usually better and more potent, in fact.
Of course, you would know which bartender makes the best version of the drink at the restaurant.
Indeed.
Oh yeah, we went for your birthday last year, and it was amazing.
Yes, it's fantastic.
It was so good.
Mm-hmm.
It was funny because it was such a carb-heavy dinner, and then it was super late, and we were leaving, and I was in a really shitty garage across the street, and the people couldn't pay, so the line was backed up. So I ended up being stuck in the garage after a very carb-heavy dinner for like 2 hours just trying to get home.
Oh,
nap time.
Amazing.
That's miserable.
Yeah, totally. Well, I believe we are at the final segment of the show, the lightning round.
Okay.
Ooh, lightning round. Crackle, crackle, crackle. So yeah, this is our weekly segment. It's last week we switched it up just for Halloween questions, but we'll go back to our standard question format. We have 3 questions we ask every guest, and at some point we're going to put a book together and have a psychology professional take a look at it and figure out what's wrong with us.
So I thought that was what you were asking earlier. So I sort of blew the hobby work question, didn't I? Well,
we can answer it. We can kind of just play that, and you can ask that. I'm like, I thought, I had this prepared or whatever, something. I don't know. We can go ahead and just rattle through all 3 of these, and you can say, your answer. Because So first question: how do you think your hobbies have contributed to your success in your full-time work?
Yeah, this was the self-improvement kick thing that I'm so glad you asked me about. So I get to admit that I've read these books a second time, and had this sort of a phase in my life. But yeah, that would be that.
Yeah, and don't feel bad about that. I had my multi-level marketing phase in my life, and I read pretty much every self-improvement book that there was. How to win friends and influence people, and how to start a conversation, Think and Grow Rich, all of that stuff.
Yeah,
so.
Think and Grow Rich. Yeah. I'm literally looking at my bookshelf right now. How to Change Your Life in 7 Days. It's like there's still a few of them poking out amongst the shelf.
7 Habits of Highly Effective Podcasters. Just kidding.
See, I think a lot, and I'm not rich. It's bullshit. Bullshit.
Okay, second question. If you could be one fictional character, who would it be?
I was always jealous of Marty McFly growing up. Probably just because, like a lot of Gen Xers had like divorced parents, and struggled a bit financially, but to be back in 1985, just starting my career with a big fancy truck, a girlfriend, and great parents, like at the end of that movie, that was always, and also being just a cool person, that was always sort of a great wish fulfillment ending for that movie, I think.
Well, you are in the future where Biff became president.
Yeah, exactly right. We are now in the Back to the Future 2 Bifftown timeline. Yes.
Okay, final question. What other interests would you like to pursue if time wasn't a constraint?
This is a really boring one, but when I went to the Throne sets each year, that was basically my travel, because I would just tack on a few extra days during each trip, and I couldn't really justify to myself. I don't know why. Looking back, doing like a second overseas trip in a year, and so as a result, I've been many times to the same few countries. Like Croatia and Northern Ireland and Spain, and they're great. But even those I didn't really see as a tourist properly, because I was working almost the entire time. So I would really like to so I'm sort of a fake global traveler because of that, and I would like to be like a real global traveler and get to Japan and Australia and a bunch of other countries that I've always had on my list.
Well, as conference circuit speakers, Jesse can attest to this too. We often travel to places and then we see whatever is between the airport and the conference center and our hotel rooms. And generally that's the extent of it. So I can totally relate to that. What's interesting about your Game of Thrones sets in Croatia and Spain and Northern Ireland, I imagine, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they have actually been able to develop additional tourism because of huge those sets as well.
Huge amounts of tourism. I mean, they have. I mean, for Northern Ireland, they pretty much revitalized they're credited with like pretty single-handedly revitalizing their economy, both in terms of tourism, but just also in terms of the amount of money that the production brought to those areas, and then that production being successful meant other productions coming there. So, in Spain and Croatia too, it's many millions of dollars for a lot of people wherever they filmed anything.
That's fantastic. Good for them. All right. Well, that was our lightning round. Thanks for participating.
So with that, I think we are at the end of the show. Just wanted to, again, say huge thank you for coming on. It's really sucked that we haven't been able to get together since pandemic, but it was nice chatting.
I know. Last time was Dim Sum, right?
I think so. Yeah. So that was end of last year.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, pretty much before everything went to hell. But thanks for coming on. Listeners, definitely check out James's book, Fire Cannot Kill a Dragon, Game of Thrones, and the official untold story of the epic series, available on pretty much wherever you can buy a book at this point.
With that, thanks.
This has been the Austin Otaku Podcast. To learn more about us and our show, to be a guest, or to subscribe to our show, go to www.austinotaku.com and follow us on Facebook and Twitter.